Hello, welcome to my third tutorial on the Web Technology series. In this lesson, we will be looking at the introduction to HTML, basic structure of HTML, break and paragraph tag, HTML heading, HTML comments list, anchor tag, HTML tables, and then forms. So to begin with, let's look at the overview of HTML. HTML actually stands for Hypertext Markup Language. A markup language is a computer language that uses tags to define elements within a document. So actually we all know that when building every website, it is HTML that is used. So basically HTML is used for building the framework of every website. HTML elements are presented by tags. So everything that we see on the web browser are done using HTML tags. So what then is a tag? HTML tags are like keywords which defines how web browsers will format and display content. So as I have first said, everything that comes or is displayed in the web browser is done using tags. So all tags are enclosed within less than and greater than sign. So examples of tags is the P tag, HR, B, U, and I. So a name of a tag is given by the text within the tag. So taking this one, we have P within the less than and greater than sign. And for that reason, this tag is called the P tag. The same thing applies to all. So this one is called the HR tag, B tag, U tag, and then the I tag. So basically, there are two types of tags. We have the single tag and then the paired tag. So what is a single tag? So with a single tag, it has only one tag. That is, can be said to be the opening tag. So a sample of a single tag is the BR tag. And then we have the paired tag. So with a paired tag, it has been grouped into two. It has an opening tag and then the closing tag. So the difference between the opening tag and the closing tag is the forward slash that comes in here. So this is the opening tag, and then this is the closing tag. So anything right from the opening tag to the content and then to the closing tag is what we term as the HTML element. So starting from the opening tag to the content and then the closing tag, when we combine all of them together, it is termed as the HTML element. Now, to build HTML or to build every website, there is an application or a program we call the test editors. They provide a playground for us to write our HTML codes. So examples of some most popular test editors are Notepad, which can be found on all Windows platforms. We have Visual Studio Code, Notepad++, Subline Test, and Atom. Alright, so to download them, the links has been provided for you. So as part of this tutorial, we will be using the Sublime Test for our lesson today or for our tutorial. Alright, so to download Sublime Test, you come over here, sublimetest.com/3, and then this page will open for you. So we choose Windows since my operating system is Windows to install. So you click on it and then it starts downloading. Okay. Now that the file has been downloaded, let's click on it and click open. So we click run and you click next, 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 and then it gets installed. So to open it, you click on start and then you enter Sublime and then it gets open. So you click on it and then it gets open. So this is how the Sublime text look like. Alright. So to create our first HTML document, it is appropriate that we create a folder so that every file that we create will be stored in there. So let's minimize this and create a folder. So you right click, new, and then folder. So we give the name HTML. Alright, now let's get back to our Sublime Text Editor. So in creating a basic structure of every HTML document, it starts with less than exclamation, doc type HTML, then greater than sign. So this is to tell the browser that the type of document we are writing is an HTML document type. So from there, we open our HTML tag. So HTML tag is a pair tag, so meaning it has the opening tag and then the closing tag. So it starts this way, HTML, that is for the opening. Then we bring our closing tag. So less than / HTML. This is our closing tag. And then in between the HTML tag, there are two things that comes in there. We have head and then the body. The head, both of them are pair tags. So the head has opening and then the closing tag. So head. And then we introduce our body. So that one is also a pair tag. So we have the opening and then the closing. All right. So in between the head, we have title. So we bring our title, which is also a pair tag, and for that reason, has a closing tag. All right. So basically, this is the structure of every HTML or every website. So in between the tag, let's bring a content in there. So what we are going to write is HTML structure, HTML structure. And then in between the body, let's introduce some text. So let's write hello world. Now let's save it. So to save it, you click on file, then you click on save. So let's direct it to the folder we created on the desktop. So this is the folder. So with the name, let's give it index. So you can give it any name you want, whether some, whether first page or anything. So you give it index, but make sure that after you've given the name, you add the file extension .html. So you can give it any name here. So you can give it some or anything, but at the end you should add the file extension .html. So you can give it any name .html. So we save it. So now let's navigate to the folder and then see what we have in there. All right, so we can see the file we created, sam.html. So let's open it. It has actually been opened in the browser. Now let's look at something over here. Let's right click on a free space on the browser and then go to view page source. So when we go to view page source, we can see the codes that we wrote in our text editor. That is the Subline test. So over here we have doc type HTML. We have our HTML, the opening and then the closing tag for our HTML. We have the head, that is the opening head and then the closing, and then we have the body. So within the head, we also have our title. So with the title, whatever that comes between the title appears over here on the tab. You get it? So we have HTML structure, and then that is what we have over here. And then we have the hello world. So everything that comes within the body is what appears inside the browser. So we have our hello world over here. Now let's move on to look at paragraph and break tag. So to do that, let's get a randomly generated text. So let's open Microsoft Office Word and then enter this function equal to rand bracket open 2,2 to get a randomly generated text. So we now have the randomly generated text. And now let's copy the first paragraph and then paste it inside our text editor. So let's replace it with the hello world. Now let's save it and then view it in our browser. So let's refresh. So we have it. So now we can see that the text is in a straight line. So let's try to move it to let's move from this place to the next line so that we can have a feel of how it has appeared inside the Word document. So to do that, let's get into our browser. Let's direct it and then press enter. Now let's save it, Control S, and then view it in the browser. All right. So we can see that even though we've moved it to the next line in the browser, but over here it is still at the same position. So how do we get from this place to the next line? The reason being that in HTML, anything you want to do to a text or anything you want to appear on the browser needs to be commanded using tags. So to do that, we introduce the break tag or the BR tag. So now let's introduce the BR tag in front of the when. So less than BR and then the greater than. Now let's save it and then refresh it on our browser. Now let's refresh. So we can see now the text has been moved to the next line. Do you get it? So the reason it has been able to move to the next line is because of the introduction of the BR tag. Now let's take it to the same line and then see something. Even though the text is on the same line in the text editor, let's save it and then refresh to see how it looks like. Sure. So even though in the browser it is on the next on a single line, but because of the introduction of the BR tag, it has moved it to the next line. So basically, to move a text to the next line, we introduce the BR tag. Now let's get back to our Word document and copy the second paragraph. Now let's paste it into our text editor. So let's give some spaces over here and then paste. Alright, now let's save it and then view it in the browser. So now let's refresh. Alright, so let's look at something over here. Inside our text editor, we've given some spaces over here, but in the browser, we can see it has been joined together. So how do we format it so that we get the view of how it has appeared in the Word document? So to do that, we introduce the P tag. So let's bring the P tag over here, or the paragraph tag. So the P comes over here, and then the P is a pair tag, meaning it has an opening tag and then a closing. So let's bring the closing at the end over here. Now let's save it and then view it inside the browser. So if we refresh, so we can see it has moved to the next line. It has given some margin between the first paragraph and then the second paragraph, giving us the feel of it, or a feel of how it has been represented in the Word document. The difference between the break and then the P tag is, with the break, it moves a text to the next line, whereas the P tag gives some kind of margin between various texts. Now let's from the ending and then introduce it in the middle to see the effect. Now let's save it and then look at something. So now let's refresh. Alright, so you see it has also given another margin over here. You get it? Over here we use the BR tag. So for that reason, move the text to the next line. And then over here we've introduced the P tag, and for that reason has given some margin between the first paragraph and then the last line of sentence. So actually the B tag moves the text to the next line, whereas the P tag gives some form of margin between lines. Now let's look at HTML comments. HTML comment is used to add explanation to a particular line of code. With comments, they do not appear in the browser, but they serve as a guide for the programmer to actually remember or to explain some particular line of code to the programmer. So with HTML comments, it starts with less than exclamation, minus minus, then the content comes in between, then minus minus, greater than. So basically this is how HTML comments look like. So now let's save this and then refresh the browser to see something. So now let's refresh the browser. You see the content we added hasn't appeared, but let's view page source. So right click, then you click on view page source. So over here we can see content over here, but has been the font color has changed to green, but over in the browser we can't see the content over here. So basically that is the work of a content, a comment. Now let's comment the first line. So we are going to comment this first line and then see how it works. So we introduce less than exclamation, minus minus, and then where we want the comment to end. So we want the comment to end within the first line, so we introduce minus minus, greater than. Now let's save it and then refresh the browser to see the effects. So we commented this first line. So now let's refresh. So if we refresh, we can see the line is no more there since it has been commented. So let's right click, view page source. So we can see within the page source it is over here, but since it has been commented, it has not appeared inside our web browser. Now let's look at HTML headings. So actually headings help us to add titles or subtitles to our document, and then it starts from H1 to H6. So the higher the number, the higher the number, the smaller the text or the font size, and then the smaller the text, the higher the number. So let's get 6 sentences so that we can know the differences between H1 up to H6. So we are going to have, this is paragraph 1. So let's copy and then paste this one 6 times. So copy 5 times, sorry. So we have 1, then we change the 1 to 2, we change this one to 3, we change this to 4, 5, and then 6. So now let's use H1, or let's wrap it around H1, the heading tag. So over here we are going to have H1, then we close it, then we bring the closing H1. So that is all we'll do to the remaining. So over here we have H2, then we end it with H2. So H3, 3. All right, now let's save it and refresh the browser to see how it appears. So now let's refresh. So we can see this is H1. So we wrapped it with H1. So as I said, the higher the number, the smaller the test. And then the smaller the number, the bigger the test. So this one is H1. So that is the biggest of all. And then we have H2, H3, H4, 5, and then 6. So the higher the number, the smaller the test, and then the smaller the number, the higher the test. So assuming we want to make this first sentence the heading of the test, or let's introduce a heading for these paragraphs. So to introduce the heading, we come into our text editor, and then over here, let's use H1 for instance. So H1, so we write this is the heading, or this is the heading. So we close it with H1. Now let's save it and then view it over here. All right, so we can see this is the heading. So this is the heading of the document. So assuming we want to make this one a subtitle, we can give it, let's say, H2 to make it a subtitle. So let's give it H2. So we open H2, and then when you open, wherever you want to end it, or yeah, wherever you want to end the test, you introduce your closing tag. So over here we introduce the closing tag. Let's save it and then see how it is. So this one becomes the subtitle. So basically that is how headings work. Now let's look at HTML list. So if we want to list items in our website, we use the HTML list. So taking for example, over here we have list of colors. So we have red, yellow, green, blue. So if we want to present something of this sort into our web browser, then we use, or our website, then we use the HTML list. So basically there are two types of lists. We have the ordered list and then the unordered list. So with the ordered list, it is in a particular order. Taking for example 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's in a particular order. But with the unordered list, it is mostly bulleted. All right. So to present that, the tags we use is the OL and then the UL tag. So let's first clear this. All right. So we have the OL, ordered list. We have the OL, and then inside the OL we introduce the LI. So the LI actually stands for list. All right. So within this we can introduce our various lists. So let's give it here. Let's say yellow. No, let's copy this and paste it a number of times. So yellow, green, blue, and let's add another one as, let's say, white. All right. So let's save it and then see how it looks. So let's refresh. So we can see we are having a list of colors over here, and then this one is ordered list. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 is in a particular order. So if we want an unordered list, we will just change the O to U, and we change this one from O to U. So we have unordered list. All right. So let's refresh the browser. No, let's save it first. I didn't save it, so let's save it and then refresh the browser. So as we can see, it has changed into a bulleted list. So for ordered list, we use OL, and then inside the OL we have our various list items, and then each list item is enclosed in the LI tag. And then with unordered list, we change the OL to UL, and then it follows the same format. So that is that for list. Now, let's move on to look at HTML tables. So with HTML tables, there are various tags we need to know when creating an HTML table. So the first one is the table tag. Actually, the table tag is a pair tag, and for that reason has an opening and then a closing tag. So it is the root of the table. Everything that comes within the table is being enclosed by the table tag. So that is why we say it is the root. And then from there, we should also know of table row, that is TR. So the TR is used whenever we want to create a row in the table. And then the TD actually contains the data of various columns within the table. So in creating a table, this is how it goes. So we first get our root tag, that is the table tag, so the opening and then the closing. And then within it, we get the tr, that is we create a particular row within it. And then the data that we want in the table should come in between the tr. So it first starts with the table, that is the root tag, and then inside the various rows or the number of rows, we use the tr to create it. So assuming we want to create 5 rows, we would have introduced 5 trs inside the root table tag. And then inside the table, the various data that needs to come in is also introduced using the td, which stands for table data. So over here, looking at this, we have two TDs within one TR. So meaning within this table row, there are going to be two columns containing data. So at the end of the day, this is the results we'll be looking at. So we have one row, which is the TR, and then inside the TR, the first TD forms the first column, and then the second TD forms the next column. So let's switch to our Word document and then try present this table. Let's try and then design this table using quotes. So the first column, we have full name, gender, and class. And then within them, we have some data within. So now let's move to our text editor so that we try using HTML codes to create this type of table. So as I said, let's clear this. So to create, the first thing you are to do is to open your root element, which is the table. So this is our root tag for table. So we open our table, and then inside the table, since we have 3 rows, over here there are 3 rows. So this is the first row, the second row, and then the third row. So to introduce that, we are going to create 3 tr tags. So we have our first tr, we get our second tr, and then our last tr, since we have 3 rows. Now that our table rows have been created, we have 3 rows. Over here, we're having 3 rows, so we've created a 3tr tags. And then inside it, we have 3 columns. So one column for full name, one column for gender, and then one column for class. Okay, so we come in here, and then inside the first tr, we introduce 3 td tags. So the first td comes here, then we enclose it this way. So let's copy and then paste this 3 times. So we introduce 3 td tags representing the 3 data columns in the table. So with the first one, we are going to enter full name, full name. The second one is gender, and then the third one is class. All right. So now let's save it and then see how it looks in the browser. So let's open our browser and now let's refresh. So we can see the 3 tables has been formed, but we are not seeing the border. We are not seeing the borders over here. So let's introduce an attribute called border. So let's set the border equal to 1. So inside the opening tag of the table, you introduce border and then you send it to 1. So now let's save it and then refresh. All right. So we can now see we have a table, and then within the table we have 3 columns in the table. The first one for full name, second one for gender, and the third one for class. Now let's work on adding the 2 other rows. So within the 2 other rows, we have Samosu, the first column, male in the second column, and then the third column we have ITE 300F. So to do that, we come in here. So inside the second table row, we are also going to introduce 3 TD tags, meaning there are 3 data in that role as well. So we introduce 3 TD tags. TD. All right. So the first data is Samuel also. So we enter the first, in the first column we have Samuel also. So we enter Samuel also. In the second one, we have male in there. So in the second TD, we are going to write male. And then in the third TD, we have the class, which is ITE 300F. So we have ITE 300F. So now let's save it and look at how it is or how it has appeared. So now let's refresh. You see we are actually getting the shape of how it looks inside the Word document. So let's add the last row. So the last row we have Augustine Asiedu, male, and the 9300F. So let's get into our test editor. So within the last TR, since we want three data columns, we are going to introduce three TDs. So we have TD for the first one, and then TD, and then the last TD. All right, so now let's enter the name. So the name is Augustine Asiedu, and then in the second one we have male, so we enter male in here, and then the last one we have ITE 300F, ITE 300F. So now let's save it, let's refresh. So we are actually having the table as it has been presented in the table here. So assuming we want to add another row, so if we want to add another row, what we'll do is, since we are creating a new row, we will introduce a TR. So TR comes here, and then the data we want to add, so we are to add three data columns. So to add that, we first introduce our TD, and then inside our TD our data comes in here. So let me make it Kofi, and then we move on to the next TD, which contains the second data column. So TD, and then let me make it he's actually, okay, let me make this one AMA for gender balance. So this one should be AMA, and then over here we make it female, then we close it, and then the last data column comes in. Let me bring this one TD, and then we give it, let's say, class 6. So let's close it. Now let's save it, come into our browser, and then let's refresh. So basically that is how tables are. So assuming we want to make this one a header, over here it sees everything to be part of the content, or the various data within the table. So assuming we want to make this one the title of the table, there is a tag called the th tag, which stands for table head. So all you do is the text a heading. To make this a heading, we have to change the td to th. So over here we change this one to th. Sorry. Then we change this one to th instead of td, since we want to make it the head. The th actually stands for table head. So we make this one th. So let's save it, and then refresh the browser to see the difference. So as you can see, this becomes the header of the various columns. Now the next thing we talk about is HTML forms, or forms in HTML. So actually, form element is used to create an HTML form for user input. So with a form element or the form tag, it helps us to accept inputs from the user. So taking for example, we want to create a website such that the user logs in. So the place where user will enter username and then his password, it is done using the HTML forms. So this is an example of HTML form. So in creating an HTML form, the first thing we need to do is to have our root element, which is the form. So in creating a form, the first thing we have to write is the form tag. And actually the form tag is also a pair tag. So we have the opening tag and then the closing tag, and then from there the form elements comes in here. So examples of the form elements is what we have here: the label, we have text, we have radio, we have buttons, we have checkbox, and many more. So now let's look at the label, how the label works. All right, so this is the label. So with the label, it helps us to write a character string, or help us to display a character text within the form. So let's go into our text editor and then look at how that works. So now let's delete this one. You can actually comment it as well, but I'll clear it. So in creating a form, you first open your root tag, which is form. So since it's a pair tag, we have the opening and then the closing. So within it, I said we should have a label. So we open and then label. So we are going to have first name. So let's save it and see how it will appear in the browser. So you see we have the first name as a label. All right. So the label actually is used to represent a character text or a string of text. Okay. So to accept input from the user or to get a place where user will enter the first name, we are going to introduce an element which is the input. So we have input, and then over here the type becomes a text. So inputs, then we give it type as text. Since we'll be using it to take text from the user, so input type equal to text. So now let's save it. With the inputs, it is a single tag, so it needs no closing tag. So let's save it, come to our browser, and then let's refresh. So we see we have a text box here with which we can enter the username over here. All right. So let's introduce another one for last name. So to get the last name, what we will do is we open a label, and then inside the label, with the label is a pair tag, so it has an opening and then a closing tag. So with the label, we introduce the last name, and then after we are done with the label, we come to we write the code to get the text box with which the user will enter his last name. So to get that, we write input type equal to text. So we save it. Let's refresh the browser. All right, so we have it as well. Okay, so we can apply what we've learned from the previous lessons to actually style it. So assuming we want to move this one to the next line, we can do so by using either the break or the p tag. So let's use the p tag to make this input move to the next line. So to get that, we introduce the p over here, and then we end it here, p, closing p. All right, so let's save it. Let's refresh. So we can see it has moved to the next line very beautifully. Now let's look at radio button. So with radio button, it's used for selecting one of many choices. So when you want the user to select between many choices, that is where we use the radio button. So taking for example, if we want a user to choose between a particular gender, there is no way a user can be a male and at the same time a female. So the radio button helps us to make user choose between many choices, one content from many choices. So to do that, let's get to our test. So let's first get a label for gender. Let's introduce it in a p tag first to spacing it up. Okay. So now let's get a label for gender. So we have label, and then inside I'm going to write gender. Alright. Okay. So now let's introduce our input type. So input type should be radio. Input type should be radio. Then over here we enter male. Alright. Okay, so then let's move to the next line and then introduce the next one. Input type equal to radio, equal to radio. Then we write female. Now let's save it and see the results in our browser. So let's refresh. So as you can now see, we have our male and then the female. Okay, but now if we are to select any of them, it is going to select both of them. It is going to select both of them because they've not been joined together, or we are not telling the website that it needs to be selected one. So what we need to introduce it, we need to have an attribute called name inside of here. So let's bring name in here. So the name, let's give it gender, and then over here let's bring name equal to gender. Now let's refresh and see something. So now yes, we can now choose between one option. So the reason why we introduce this name attribute is because when the name is introduced, it tells the web browser that Both radio buttons are in the same category, and for that reason, users should be allowed to select only one gender or only one option out of the many choices. Now let's look at checkboxes. So checkboxes, it is used for selecting multiple options from a list of choices. So unlike the radio button, which allows the user to select from one option from a number of choices or a number of options, with the checkboxes, it allows the user to select multiple options. So taking for example my favorite food. So with this one, the user has the privilege or the mandate to select either the three, two, or one. So let's look at how this can be done in HTML. So let's get into our text editor. So to do that, let's first create a paragraph block. Alright, so let's get a label to display our text. So we have label. So over here, we are going to write my favorite fruits. Alright, so now let's introduce the input type. So we are going to have input type equal to, then over here we make it check box. Alright, so now let's introduce the name of the fruit. So let's say apple over here. Alright, so let's move on to the next one. So input type equal to checkbox. So let's introduce the next fruit, which is orange. Then the last one, pineapple. So input type equal to checkbox, and then we get pineapple. Alright, so now let's save it and see the results in the browser. So now let's refresh. Alright, so we have the fruits, but over here I don't like the alignment, so let's try and install it using the various p and then the br tags. So to do that, let's get back to our code and then let's introduce a break tag over here. So let's bring a br here, let's introduce another br here, then let's introduce a br. So now let's save it and then refresh our browser. So okay, wow, so it looks as in the present. So with this, a user can select from multiple options, but over here the user has the chance to select from only one option out of the multiple options. So that is the difference between the radio and then the check. All right, so the next input type we will talk of is the submit button. So actually the submit button is a button that helps us to submit a form. So after the forms has been filled, if your website is connected to a database, when you hit on the submit button, it makes an HTTP request or it submits the form to the database server for processing. And then we also have the reset. So we have input type equals reset, which is used to reset or clear a form. So assuming you filled the form and then you realize the data you've entered is not what you actually wanted to enter, and then you want to clear the form without clearing them one after the other, we use the input type button to do so. So now let's look at how it works inside our test editor. So let's get into our test editor. So let's introduce a p tag. So let's see. So it goes input. Sorry. So this is how it works. Input type equal to submit. Submit. All right. So now we add another attribute called a value. So the value actually displays the name within the button. So the name, let's give it submit. All right. Now let's close it. So let's save it and then see how it is. Right, so now let's save it and get into our browser. So now let's refresh. All right, so we have the button in here. So after we fill the forms, somehow, let's say also gender male, then you select your favorite fruit. So after I submit, it sends the form to the web server. So we also have the reset. So with the reset, we just have to change the submit to reset. Then we change the value in here to reset. Now let's save it. So if you get into your browser and then you refresh, it will change to reset. So with the reset, After you've entered anything and then you do not like that option, the moment you click on reset, it clears the forms for you. Thank you for joining this section. If you find this content very useful, kindly hit on the subscribe button for more video. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Bye bye.